There will not be a third term for Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin. The mayor announced at the end of November he will not run for re-election. He was officially sworn into his first term back in January of 2016. Take a look.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut, and that you will faithfully discharge, according to law, the duties of the mayor of the city of Hartford to the best of your ability, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Mr. Mayor. There we go.
And Mayor Luke Bronin joins me in Studio A this morning. I'm always fascinated by that first swearing in to kind of the end. There's a lot of toll being the chief executive of anything, including the capital city. You look pretty much the same as you did there, I think.
I don't know. I feel about 20 years older. That feels a lifetime away.
So we saw a clip at the beginning of the show of your announcement saying that you've chosen not to run. Why?
Look, as I said, I'm finishing my 7th year, coming into my 8th year as mayor. A lot of places have two-term limits after 8 years. I'm not saying we should, but I think it's a natural time to take a pause, to reflect. And I think in this case, the right thing is just to pass the baton.
And obviously, there's already been interest in your successor, and there's been a lot of talk about what happens next. But I want to talk about that decision because you say it's the natural thing to take a pause and move on. It also makes it a natural time to look back. And one thing that struck me in looking back at some of the things you talked about as accomplishments and where things are now is just looking at Luke Bronin, the candidate, way back then. I mean, here's a guy who grew up first in New York and then in Greenwich, a couple of degrees from Yale, not from the city, a white mayoral candidate in a majority city. How did you make the connections, as you look back now, how did you make the connections that allowed you to serve for this long?
Look, Sarah and I made Hartford our home in 2006, and we fell in love with the city. And one of the things I love about Hartford and living in Hartford is that you can become a part of the fabric of the town very quickly. You can build relationships really quickly. It's a beautiful mix of a city that's got so many of the assets and cultural strengths of cities much bigger, but it's a community. It's a small community. And so, for one thing, we've been building it as our home for a long time. And then during the campaign, as you know, just got out there and knocked on a whole lot of doors and had a lot of individual conversations and just tried to be honest about what I thought we could do better. And I'm grateful that the voters of Hartford gave me the chance to try.
Did you have to build that credibility, whether it was one-on-one at a door that you had just knocked at, or on a larger scale with the teachers or the cops or whoever? Sure. Did it take time to build that trust as you look back?
Yeah, absolutely. It took time even after becoming mayor. But remember, before I ran for mayor, I had served as the general counsel of the governor for a couple of years. So I had also been working in partnership with a lot of people in the city and beyond for quite a while. But yeah, I think in these jobs, you are constantly working on building and then strengthening and renewing those partnerships. If you're not working hard at that every day, you're not going to be able to do what you need to do.
No doubt about it. Those connections you made at the legislature were key, especially in those early years where finances were a struggle, a mess. It was tough in those early years financially. You spoke a lot, both in your campaign for your first term and as a mayor in your early years, about regional cooperation and saying Hartford shouldn't be on an island. It needs to be part of this region. It has to be the center of this region. Do you feel you've made strides?
I think we've made some. Look, I will say I think we had made meaningful strides coming into 2020. I think in 2019, coming into 2020, you could feel a real energy and momentum. I think that people were rediscovering Hartford in a lot of ways and regaining confidence in the city and rediscovering the city as their city, whether they lived in or around Hartford or from further afield. And I think there's no question that the pandemic set that back. During the pandemic, people retreated back into their living rooms, into their homes, into their communities. And so that means we've got work ahead to recapture that momentum and energy. But I think we've made a lot of progress already in doing that. But that's going to be the work of years ahead.
You had said in some interviews back in 2016-17 that Hartford's financial situation was unsustainable. And at the time, I was still doing investigative reporting. And I actually flew to Detroit and talked to bankruptcy trustees there who had been through municipal bankruptcy. You were outspoken with me and others at the time saying it wasn't necessary, but it wasn't.
No, it was not. Just to be clear, I was not saying it wasn't necessary. In fact, what I was saying is that we had to prepare in earnest for a bankruptcy filing, because what I said we would not do under any circumstances was just kick the can or buy time or fake it. And I actually spent a good amount of time in Detroit and talking to Mayor Duggan as well. And if you remember, we actually had some community forums where we talked about what bankruptcy meant for cities, what the process was like. And we were prepared to do that because the one thing that I was determined to do was build a strong foundation for the long term. Now, I'm grateful that we were able to do it a different way. We were able to build partnerships, ask our unions to come to the table in big ways, and they did. Ask some of our biggest companies to make financial contributions toward that effort, and they did, and then build that critical partnership with the legislature and with the state to address the long-term debt issues, and to make some very deep and difficult cuts ourselves. But I think it's important to remember, the city was bankrupt. We ultimately didn't have to file, but we were prepared to do whatever had to be done to build a stronger fiscal foundation. Because if we didn't get that right, then nothing else that we tried to do would matter.
Well, and here's where I was going with that question was if it was unsustainable then, and you talked about the steps you took as you leave, and I know you got a year to go, but as you walk out of that office, do you feel it is sustainable now? Or where are we sort of on that spectrum?
I think there's been enormous progress, and it's a world different than it was 7 years ago. But I think that progress is fragile, and it has to be protected. And that means that it's going to require continued discipline and rigor in budgeting. We haven't, since we put that long-term fiscal sustainability plan in place, we haven't borrowed a single dollar to make any capital investments. We've done that by building up surpluses year to year and then reinvesting that in the community. We've kept our growth rate below what most suburbs have seen. And we were able to enact the biggest reduction in the property tax in about 30 years this past year. So we've made real progress, but it will take that care in governing and budgeting day to day, month to month, year after year to sustain that work. Because there's no question that, like other Connecticut cities, there are some structural challenges. Connecticut cities are geographically small with an intense concentration of need, and in our case, with half of the property non-taxable in a state where the only source of locally generated revenue is the property tax. So there are still big structural challenges, but I think we're on the right path.
I want to ask you about one more issue. We only have about a minute left, and that is the violence in the city. And that's when you've been on this program to talk about that in the past. As you prepare for your final year, what can be done? Is there an answer out there?
Look, it has been devastating to see the level of gun violence and fatal gun violence that we've seen in Hartford and that city after city around the country has seen over the past couple of years. First, I want to say thank you to our law enforcement, who I think have been doing a tremendous job. They've taken more illegal guns off the street last year and the year before than ever before. They are making arrests and solving both fatal and non-fatal shootings at a rate far above peer cities. And we've also put an unprecedented amount, both in terms of financial resources and energy, into partnerships with folks doing the work of community violence intervention. But I do think that there are things we have to tackle at the state level. I think it's too easy right now for people who are actively involved in gun violence to get out on bail while they're awaiting a trial. And I think the probation and parole system needs to be strengthened so that if folks who are on probation and parole continue to be involved in this activity, that they go back into a facility and off of our streets. And I think we have to have honest conversations about that and tackle that on an urgent basis.
We're all out of time. A good thing is we have another year to continue to ask you these questions. But what's next for Luke Bronin? Will we see your name on a ballot for another office? I
don't know. I mean, I love this work. I feel really grateful that I had the chance to do this work as mayor, and then before that as general counsel of the governor, and before that in the Obama administration. I love public service, and to me it gives a real sense of meaning and fulfillment to the work that I do. I hope to have a chance to do that work in some way, but I really don't have a plan. And as you say, I got a year to figure one out.
All right, well, we'll see you back here during that year, Mayor Luke Bronin. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.